So my name is Philippe Crist. I'm with the International Transport Forum based in Paris. We are an intergovernmental organization that represents 57 member country transport ministries. And what I'll present
Philippe?
today is, yes?
We still don't see your screen, so you have to accept to be a presenter. We will do that again, change presenter, and put you, oops, we don't see you
there.
Anymore.
Can you?
Yes, we see you. They're perfect. So.
All right.
Sorry.
That's good. So that isn't me on the slide, by the way. What I'll share with you today is some of the insights that we've found from doing some work on data and big data applications in the transport sector. And in particular, we've done this work in conjunction with a number of industry players, both in Europe and outside of Europe, to try to help our members understand what is, if you will, in the pipeline, and especially from a regulatory perspective, how they need to be prepared in transport to deal with some of the issues that will probably come up, especially as concerns location data. What I'll talk about today are more some of the strategic issues, not some of the technical issues that are involved with big data applications in the transport sector. And in particular, as I said, I'll talk about those as they relate to location data. Now, as we've heard, let me just... my slide isn't advancing. I don't know, there we go. As we've heard in the previous presentation, never before has so much information about so many people, events, and objects been available at such speed to so many people. But I'd like to add a few caveats to those that we heard earlier. And the first is that big data has always been around. And that's because big data is a relative term, and it's directly related to our technical capacity to collect, process, and make sense of very large data sets. For example, when grain market data was etched onto clay tablets in Sumeria thousands of years ago, it represented big data relative to their logging technology. At that time, never before had so much data been stored and analyzed. And the same holds true for 19th century epidemiological data regarding the spread of cholera, for example, in London in the 19th century. And of course, the first spreadsheet software that we saw emerged decades ago. It's likely that what we now consider big data will be seen rather colloquially as small data sets in the not too distant future. So we have to keep in mind that the conditional aspect of big is related to our current technological capacity to process that. Now, the current raft of big data for transport applications emerges from an increasingly ubiquitous population of sensors and the rapid scaling up of machine-recorded logging that quantify even the minutest aspects of transport activities and, in some respects, our own lives. I think what we can say is that big data, as we understand it now, came about when the cost of storing information became less than the cost of actually keeping that data and making, or more precisely, to make the decision to throw it away. And certainly less than the future unknown benefit of keeping the data. As we heard earlier, extracting insight from big data, big or small, is a process, it's a pipeline, and extracting insight from new or newly available large, diverse, and high-velocity data sets is not a trivial matter. The pipeline spans from the collection of data, its preparation for storage and analysis, its integration with other sources, modeling, visualization, final analysis, interpretation, archiving, and in particular when it comes to privacy concerns, its deletion and the decision made whether or not to keep or to retain the data or to delete it permanently. Or even it raises the question if this data can be deleted permanently. This data that's collected in this pipeline can be purposely sensed. This is when data is collected from a customized sensor network, for example, for predefined use. But data can also be opportunistically sensed. And this might be when data is collected for one purpose and used for another. These are the kinds of mashups that we heard about earlier. Increasingly, data is also crowdsourced by citizen sensors reporting on their own individual experience, either via content sharing platforms or just because the technologies that they employ are sharing their data. And in all cases, this type of data can be born digital or born analog. Born digital data is created by users or by computing device specifically for use in a machine processing environment, whereas born analog concerns data that arises from an imprint of a physical phenomena on a sensing device. Video, audio data is a good example of analog or born analog data. All along the pipeline, data users and processors have to account for the issues relating to heterogeneity of the data, volatility, scale, privacy, representativeness, and value to both users and to individuals that generate this data. Now, crucially for public policy purposes, authorities and individuals cannot operate under the expectation that big data has done away with the need for statistical rigor, since big data is not only prone to many of the same errors and biases in smaller data sets, it also creates new ones. This is important to understand because in some cases, the type of new situations, new errors, new biases, and new data constraints may limit the usefulness of what we now call big data. And for some uses, small data sets might still be or even represent a better option for answering specific policy concerns. There are sensors everywhere in machinery, in roads, and bridges, but when we look at traffic data, transport data, and improving long-term planning with this data, one of the most transformative sensor platforms by far is in our hands. In 2013, there were 6.6 billion mobile subscriptions globally, and this is a number that Ericsson estimates will grow to 9 billion 5 years from now. About 2/3 of these concern phones that can be roughly located and tracked, either with GPS or cell phone signals, cell phone tower triangulation, whereas 1/3 involves smartphones. These are phones with multiple and precise sensor chips that are embedded. And this class of mobile device is one of the ones that it's increasing most rapidly. We believe that this type of sensor platform will provide the bulk of mobility-related data in the future. And as this happens, this type of data platform, data collection and data broadcasting platform will raise considerable privacy concerns, and here's why. You consider an individual's movement through a city, here a movement that's along 2 coordinate planes, but also their movement in time, here along a vertical axis. Now, other people are moving around the city as well, each with their own space-time trajectories. One of the things that we have to keep in mind is our daily behavior is highly repetitive, as are the space-time trajectories that we produce and that are recorded by our mobile devices or using our mobile devices. Because of this, data concerning individual trajectories serves as a powerful quasi-identifier. They allow individuals to be identified much as fingerprints do. This information is extremely valuable from a policy perspective, but for a commercial perspective as well. Some have called data the new oil of the digital economy. Now, this arguably is an exaggerated claim, but pushing that analogy further, if data is the core resource for the 21st century, then location data is the new economy's gold. But this data is also extremely personal, that's where the value comes from, and difficult to protect. It's difficult because location data is precise and getting more so every day. The proliferation of devices able to use global navigation satellite signals have been fundamental to the growth in location data. But new location techniques are further enhancing tracking precision. Exploiting Wi-Fi network location data is perhaps one of the most important of these at present, but in the future we can see evidence or some indications that exploitation of video feeds and audio signals will allow even more precise and more ubiquitous tracking capability. The exploitation of the onboard sensor data in smartphones can reveal how the smartphone owner is moving. This capability is nearly mature, reliable in many tests, and will likely become more so as devices combine sensors with on-chip processors. These are processors on a chip. This type of technology allows a lot of pre-digesting of data that is something that will raise some privacy issues, as I'll speak to in a moment. Protecting all of this data by anonymization is difficult because it remains unique even at higher levels of aggregation or lower levels of granularity. Now here, this is an example taken from the city of Chicago. Like almost all cities, It's serviced by a network of cellular communication towers that enable seamless mobile phone use. These masts delineate mobile service cells that are used to handle phone calls without disconnections. And because of this, they are also used to locate phones within their perimeter at a scale of a few dozen to a few hundred meters. Now let's take an individual that can be precisely located by their smartphone sensors here in the red dot as they move through the city and through these cells. They're going about their business, but their smartphone is also going about its business. It's broadcasting data to Wi-Fi networks as it tries to connect to known networks. It's storing and broadcasting in clear text time-stamped geolocation data used in the navigation app that the person may be using. It's sending out precise location fixes as the user updates their profile on Facebook or tags a new restaurant in Foursquare or Yelp. In the end, we have a very precise track of that person's movement here in red, as well as a more anonymous trace of the same movement as recorded by the phone's presence in different cell phone tower cells. There are, of course, hundreds of other phones that are also present in these cells at the same time, and so this may serve as a reasonable basis for anonymizing the data, but it isn't. Location data anonymized by clustering at the level of mobile telecom cells can be re-identified in 95% of the cases with only 4 external data points, using, for instance, a Facebook login, a Foursquare check-in, previously joined Wi-Fi networks, or data from credit card transactions. This is the real strength of the type of data joining technologies and processes that we heard about in the previous presentation. These re-identification efforts are not trivial. I mean, they do require some knowledge and some technology, but they're not difficult and underscore the difficulty in protecting personal location data, which is quite persistent. And even after anonymization, in this case, to the level of a several hundred meter square area telecom tower cell can still be used to reveal information about the specific location of individuals. To be clear, this data fusion allows the generation of new knowledge and spurs innovation. That's why, in many cases, we allow it when we are given the choice to reveal our location data. But the privacy risks are real and are not well addressed by authorities at present. The difficulty with which trajectory data can be adequately and persistently protected has led some to question whether it's worth the effort to do so. Data protection policies are generally lagging behind new modes of data collection and uses, and this is especially true for location data. Rules governing the collection and use of personal data, data that cannot be de-identified, are outdated in 2 ways. Data is now collected in ways that were not anticipated by regulation or citizens, and authorities have not accounted for the new knowledge that emerges from data fusion. Generally, a split has emerged among those who would seek to retain prior notification and consent frameworks for data collection, and those who would abandon these in order to focus on specifically or specifying allowable uses of that data only. Now, among the former are those who would seek to modify and strengthen rules based on the principles outlined in the 1980 OECD Personal Data Protection Framework Guidelines. These were created almost 40 years ago, and they're still generally underneath most of the personal data protection legislation that we see in the world. Now, among the latter, there are many in the private sector and some national administrations who suggest that these rules are to a large extent unworkable in their current form, and a new focus on regulating use rather than notification and consent presupposes the presence of a well-funded and competent regulatory authority to oversee these data uses and to resolve and possibly prosecute conflicts. For that paradigm to work, that agency has to be equipped to address asymmetric and extended legal struggles with large and powerful multinational corporations who, in many cases, own or collect this type of personal data. Now, that expectation might be overly optimistic. There's a third way, and this way is increasingly working its way into the regulatory framework of many countries. This third way is ensuring privacy by designing it into the big data pipeline that I illustrated at the beginning from the outset. That is hard baking in privacy concerns in the technology and the processes used to collect this type of data. Adapting data protection frameworks to increasingly pervasive and precise location data is difficult largely because data privacy has not served as a fundamental design element from the outside. More effective protection of location data will have to be designed upfront into technologies, algorithms, and processes. And here we see technological advances, including the arrival of the type of system-on-a-chip sensors that I talked about earlier, can help by allowing on-the-fly data encryption, which is probably at present the strongest way to protect personal data. Another way forward could be to include protocols allowing citizens to control and allocate rights regarding their data, that is, data that pertains to them. An example of this approach is the Safe Answer protocol developed and currently being tested by MIT. This protocol ensures that all personal data, including location data, is stored in personal data vaults managed by a neutral third party. Could be private sector, could be public sector. Data access rights and preferences are determined by individuals either on a case-by-case basis or by setting privacy profiles. And crucially, commercial or public entities wishing to derive insight from this data never have access to the raw data, to the raw personal data. Rather, they query the personal data vault. The query in the form of a code snippet operates on that data, and if granted permission, all that is returned is a data-less answer. In this way, no data is revealed, and all that passes between those wishing to gain knowledge from personal data and those that derive or generate that data, individuals, is a snippet of code and a dataless return. This, of course, would change many business cases right now for those companies that are generating data, collecting data, and using data. But failing to ensure strong privacy protection may result in a regulatory backlash against the collection and processing of that same location data. And this would hamper innovation, reduce consumer welfare, and curb the economic benefits the use of such data allows. Another insight coming from this work is that new models of public-private partnership involving data sharing may be necessary to leverage both public and private benefits. On the one hand, an increasing amount of the actionable data pertaining to road safety, traffic management, and travel behavior is held now, not by the public sector, but by the private sector. And on the other hand, public authorities are still and will likely continue to be mandated to provide essential services that the public prefers private actors not to provide. The question then raises, should data access by public authorities continue to be modeled strictly on a supplier-client relationship, that is, where the public sector purchases data, purchases access to data, collected and held by the private sector? Or can we think of new, more creative partnerships that could be developed that enable both the private sector to innovate and the public sector to carry out its mandates? And we can see this type of partnership starting to emerge from the difficult task, if you will, the difficult process of creating new regulatory arrangements for services that fall outside the scope of current and sometimes brittle regulation. And of course the concomitant need for public authorities to ensure that these services do not run counter to public policy objectives. A classic case right now is what we see in the case of transportation network companies like Uber, like Lyft, and taxi regulation. There are many reasons why public authorities have said that TNCs, these transportation network companies, should be regulated. And on the other hand, TNCs respond by saying, well, those don't really pertain, those regulatory concerns don't pertain to them because they do not have the same impact that taxis had when the regulation for taxis was created. What we can see now is a quid pro quo arrangement emerging in some cases where the regulatory authority allows some flexibility in their approach to TNC licensing, on the condition that the TNC companies provide the regulatory authority with data that allows them to check and validate the claims that the TNCs make. This is the case in Boston. It's the case in a number of other instances in the Philippines and Mexico City. Innovative data sharing partnerships will likely develop through these, but they should not obviate the need for market power tests, benefit cost assessment, and public utility objectives. Now, this is where the public authority has to retain its mandate, its original mandate, to ensure public welfare outcomes. And finally, one of the things that we heard about as well in the previous presentation is that using this data, using the type of data that's being generated now, is and requires a certain amount of technical knowledge and capacity. transport authorities will have to understand what the data that they're collecting or using says and what it doesn't say and how best it can be used. But in order to do this, they'll have to ensure an adequate level of data literacy for handling new streams of data and novel data types. And quite clearly, this is one area where the private sector is very much more advanced than the public sector. One way to help that is ensuring robust, persistent, and harmonized provenance metadata, which facilitates data usability audits by the public sector. But even that isn't enough, because we'll need a new class of technicians or data-savvy regulators that will be able to understand the limitations and the uses of the data that they are either accessing directly from private sector operators or purchasing, as I said earlier, from private sector operators. So those are some of the strategic issues that have been highlighted when we talked about big data with our both industry partners and with our countries. And so I'm happy to answer any questions on these issues. Thank you very much. And handing it back to Ertika.
Thank you very much, Philippe. This was very interesting. We have received a few questions. And the first question was, or perhaps comment, was that future sensors basically was about the sensors in the machines and the massive amount of data that they will produce. Let's say, I mean, machines that may be mobile, but not necessarily coming from phones or GPS. So I guess that refers to the information that is produced by the vehicles, for example. I don't know, very simple sensors measuring heat of your engine, for example. Are these data also data that are considered as very valuable, and how do they relate to what you explained? Tell us.
No, absolutely. This data, let's take vehicle data we heard about in the previous presentation as well. So you have data from the vehicle and the operation of the vehicle that can provide insight, because what a vehicle is a roaming sensor platform, and that insight can relate to, for example, rain. So when you have the windshield wipers entering into operation, it could also represent data about the condition of the road, either temporary, for example, icing, by collecting the data from ABS systems that are trying to deal with a slippery road surface, or on road condition, accelerometer data that shows that a road or a stretch of road is particularly bumpy. You can imagine that automatic pothole reports are generated by these type of sensors. So yes, of course, the data is valuable, but where it becomes sensitive, of course, is whenever that data is linked to, or can be linked to, a location and an individual. And one of the things that we see is that that linking, if you will, that data fusion is rather trivial now, especially if identifiers are openly available. And even in some cases where those identifiers aren't, because just using location data and cutting it with other instance of location reporting can allow people to understand who is doing what when. And so yes, the data from vehicle sensors are valuable, but they do not fall outside of the scope of having to deal with some of the very real data anonymity or lack of data anonymity that they raise.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Philippe. We'll take one other question, and this question is related to the car-to-car, or the so what would be called DSRC in general. And basically, the question is: are these information that are transmitted every tenths of a second actually causing privacy concerns?
Well, it depends on what structure they're being transmitted. If DSRC includes no encryption component and includes in clear text, as it does in early trials, specific location data, then yes, it creates privacy concerns. And one of the things that we see is that the arrival of more rapid and sensor-linked or transmission mechanism linked computing capacity is one way to introduce a high level of encryption into this data. Encryption is, as I said earlier, the best way to ensure that data remains private and only those that are given proper authority, including the individual that produces the data, can control it. Other forms of anonymization by generalization, by other types of methods, are all prone, much more prone to re-identification. And re-identification, linking individuals to locations, is the key privacy concern that I think we have to face.
Thank you very much. I'll take another question that popped up, and then actually that may be interesting from the OECD point of view. Is there any general programs for educating the general population, the wide public, on the privacy issues that that big data in transport creates, and how is this addressed from a wider perspective at ITF?
No, I think at present, I have to say that there is no broad approach to increasing data literacy, if you will, or understanding models of data collection and use among the population. I mean, there are some instances in national cases, but those tend to be rather small, and people aren't really looking for this information. What they're looking for is the usefulness of an application that they've downloaded, and very quickly they'll say they'll accept any term that's presented to them, and just as a way to ensure that they get access to navigation data very quickly, or whatever it is that the application is providing them. That said, what we do see is consistent polling around OECD and ITF members shows that people are wary that they're sharing their location data, and they're not very confident that this location data won't be used for purposes that they do not agree to. So it's interesting that they don't trust the fact that they're sharing their data, but they still share the data because obviously they're getting a lot of immediate value from using this type of app or these types of apps that they're using. Another thing that's interesting is that we see a lot of apps collect location data and transmit it that have that serves no purpose for the service being delivered by the app. A classic example is, I think, something along the lines of 30 to 40% of all apps in the Android store collect location data that is not linked at all to the app service. For example, a flashlight app that collects your specific location. There's no reason for a flashlight app to collect location data except if it's to sell to other people, and that's sort of the business behind a lot of these. So there is a need for, from a regulatory perspective, for regulators, authorities to enter into this and help ensure that public outcomes are delivered, while at the same time allowing individuals to get access to these new services that they value.
Thank you very much for these insights. It leaves me about 2 minutes to give some information about the workshop that is going to take place on the 7th of October, and I'll directly jump to that. So I had a couple of slides actually that I don't think that we need to really go through. Basically, that we are in the presence of really large amounts of near real-time information and transmission of massive amounts of data. And these data in transport are very important for many different topics. We have tried to identify these topics before putting together the agenda of this workshop. And you will recognize in some of the titles of the presentations that we cover most of the points that are here represented on your slide. So we know that big data may have or will have a very high potential impact for transport in terms of efficiency of the transport, in terms of environment, in terms of safer mobility. But what is also very important is to understand better socio-economic behavior within the transport, make better policy decisions eventually, and also at the European point of view, have a global leadership around big data and transport. So, so there are some direct effects to the society, but also some effects that are strategic for Europe, and we need to embark in that. So this is why ERTICO has been asked to create this workshop, to organize this workshop on smart, green, and integrated transport. Actually, ERTICO is subcontracted by the consortium of BigDataEurope to organize these events. We have been subcontracted to organize 3 events over the 3 years that are coming up. So this is the first one, and it will take place in Bordeaux. And the first one is dedicated to understanding better the requirements for big data management within the area of intelligent transport domains. For some, we put some focus in this workshop on more the road transport. We know that road transport is not the only kind of transport that is important for big data and vice versa, but for that particular workshop, we had to focus more on road transport. We will have 3 sessions, more on looking at the data-centric initiatives within Europe in transport, the different kinds of applications that exist already in transport, and then some 2 presentations for tools and technologies. Then we will finish the workshop with 3 breakout sessions of about 40 minutes, where we will talk about the business aspects and the business requirements, the policy requirements, and the technology requirements with regards to big data management in transport. So we are very glad to have a keynote speaker from the European Commission, Director of Sustainable and Secure Society. This person is Paul Timmers, and he is actually the person overviewing both, on one side, the Big Data in Europe project and the Big Data in Europe aspect, as well as the department or the unit on smart cities. So it is a very good combination, and I'm very glad that he accepted to give this keynote. And we have quite a series of presentations during that morning, where we will first start with a literature review, look at public transportation issues, look at the social media in transport, look how big data is used in real-time traffic information, traffic management, look also how big data is used for open logistics. One aspect also on the fact that vehicles are generating mass amounts of information, and eventually all this information will be or it has the capacity to be shared. We talked about it earlier. And then the 2 last presentations, looking at what is being done in other sectors that can be used in transport. So that's Simon Sherry that gave the presentation earlier. And then also a particular example on the behavioral studies using big data, well, a kind of big data that is coming from field operational test, and where we will have a look at what kind of data analysis we can do for behavioral studies with this kind of data. So brings me to the end of that very short introduction. We also invite all the transport community to sign up to the W3C community group on transport. The link is displayed there. There is, if you go on the Big Data Europe website, there is a newsletter. Please sign up and exchange also your news, such as the one that you have given during in your questions also. And then there is a series of social media that we use: Twitter, LinkedIn, SlideShare, Flickr. So don't hesitate to go and look at these ones and also follow them. So with this, that was very short. I will look forward to seeing you in October 7th, actually in Bordeaux, and don't hesitate to ask questions and or comment on our activities. Thank you very much. I'm not sure, Andrea, if there is any other questions. We have gone over the time about 4. So I think there is not that many questions anymore, and our time is up. I would like to really thank Simon and Philippe for their very interesting presentation, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion on in Bordeaux. So please follow us, keep going, keep asking questions and giving comments, and we try to issue as soon as possible the first draft of these recommendations or these requirements for transport after this workshop to the community. Thank you, Philippe. Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Andrea, for the organization. And talk to you soon, all.